What does human rights means to you?
I think for me, human rights means, the entitlements that every human being has by virtue of being human. And from a Christian point of view, we know that every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. So they have that God-given dignity. So I think it's from that dignity flow the human rights in order for that person to live up to God's intention of being a mirror image of God. So that's the way I understand human rights. Yeah.
A lot of participants in the exposure program experienced, especially in the rural areas, an absence of governmental structures. What does this mean for the promotion of human rights in these areas?
I think this is where the promotion of human rights become very important because, as I said, human rights are not a favor granted by any body or any government. These are entitlements flowing from the very essence of being human. The problem we have generally in Zambia is that the appreciation and understanding of human rights across the board in terms of the population is very, very low. I think a lot of people who talk about human rights are people like me, people who head faith-based organizations or human rights organizations. But the general citizenry has a very, very shallow understanding of human rights, more so the people in the countryside. So you can imagine if, for example, people in the rural areas understood what it meant to be a rights holder, a person who has those rights, and then they started acting on those rights to demand for the rights. I'm sure the government will be compelled to, act on the challenges that people face in these places. Even in the absence of government structures, I think government will be held to account for the low standards of living, the lack of access to water, the lack of access to social services, the lack of service delivery, because the ordinary citizens believes that they have a right to these things. So I think that the situation in the rural areas is compounded by the fact that very few people in these places understand that they have rights which they can demand from the state.
Given these situations, what potentials and chances can give an organization like JCTR in this situation?
I think an organization like ours, which is part of the Catholic Church, has an important role to play to bring awareness and education around human rights to rural areas. As I say, we are part of the Catholic Church, which is present everywhere in the country. And I think that our work and our message has been very well received in the past on a variety of issues. And I think that even as we continue to work on education around human rights, I think that we have a huge potential to help many Zambians to begin to demand what is rightfully theirs. Yeah.
In your opinion, what are the main obstacles for a better development of human rights?
I think the first thing has to be the small number of organizations that employ the human rights-based approach to their programming. Secondly, because you have a small number of organizations who are small in nature anyway in terms of capacity, the low capacity, that the human rights-based approach is not promoted well enough across the country. So I think that's a big obstacle to begin with, because if you had many more human rights groups, or you had groups that were using the human rights-based approach and they're spread around the country, then you can roll out the understanding of human rights. Then secondly, because again, these are interrelated issues, because of the low capacity and the low understanding of human rights, you have very, very few people, if any, that hold their duty bearers to account, even at a very local area level. Like if you are in a village, there are village structures that you can use to demand accountability. In the communities, there are levels of authority, or people who wield authority, or people who are called duty bearers, who are not bothered by the people themselves. So I think for me, the core point is that there's a low level of appreciation of human rights, partly because there's a small number of groups which are also small in size that are promoting human rights, and consequently there's a very low appreciation of human rights, and therefore people cannot even begin or contemplate to demand accountability from duty bearers.
The topic of this conference is traditional values and human rights. Can you name an example where traditional values are an obstacle for promoting human rights?
I can very quickly think of the way our societies are organized traditionally. They are hierarchical, and that ordinary citizens cannot challenge hierarchy or authority. So, for example, if a traditional leader is not performing according to expectations of his subject, his people, because of this notion of respect for elders, his subjects or her subjects cannot challenge him or her, even when it is well known that this person is not acting in the interest of the community. So I think that's one value that I can cite immediately, which in my view would be an obstacle to the robust application of human rights-based approaches.
And the other way around, can you name an example where traditional values can support the promotion of human rights?
I think that, I think we've talked very often about this communitarian ethic in African societies. I think for me that comes close to what in religious circles we call the solidarity ethic, which means, when it comes to recognizing and respecting an individual as somebody who has his own or her own dignity, which commands human rights, I think that ethic, communitarian ethic, would lend itself to a good application of human rights.
Which input can give the participants of the exposure program? What role do they play during this conference? What ideas and aspects can they bring in?
Given that the majority, if not all, are coming from Germany, Germany has enjoyed very good relationship at the governmental level with Zambia. I hope that they can influence government leaders in Germany, even religious leaders in Germany, to perhaps develop a much more focused approach to the promotion of human rights in Zambia, so that when the German government or the German church is relating to their counterparts here in Zambia, they can bring to the fore the importance of mainstreaming human rights approaches down to the grassroots.
Speaking of cooperation between the countries, do you think that northern countries may support you to improve the human rights in your country, in Zambia?
I think they can. The only potential pitfalls is sometimes there's a heavy emphasis on one group of human rights as opposed to the other. So I think that there has to be some sensitivity. Again, it has come out very strongly in the deliberations here. I think if there's sensitivity to the local conditions, so that we are aware of how to approach some difficult human rights issues, then I think the northern countries, northern communities of the northern church, I think would play a very significant role in bringing or promoting not only the understanding of human rights, but also improving the capacity of ordinary citizens to demand accountability from their governments.
Thank you. I have another